Welcome to the second video in the series on communication titled Communication Cycle. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here for this because today we're going to completely change how you think about your everyday interactions. You see, communication is not just a single isolated act of speaking or writing. We often think of it kind of like picking up a rock and throwing it over a high brick fence. You toss it and you just assume it landed exactly where you wanted it to. But, did it actually hit the target? Did it land in the mud? Did someone on the other side even catch it? When we view communication as a one-way street like that, we literally have absolutely no idea what happens after the words leave our mouths. In reality, effective communication is a continuous, dynamic cycle. It is a fundamental human process where we share information, exchange ideas, and most importantly, create mutual understanding. So today, we're going to look really closely at the complete journey a single message takes as it moves from one mind to another, and how it eventually loops right back around. Okay, let's dive right into this agenda and map out the six-part journey we're taking today. First, we'll examine the anatomy of communication. Then, we'll track how an idea turns into a message. From there, we'll see how messages travel through channels, reach receivers, and get decoded. Next, we'll look at feedback, tackle the concept of noise, and finally bring it all together by looking at the cycle in real life. Section 1, the anatomy of communication. To truly grasp why misunderstandings happen, and they happen all the time, right? We first need to understand the underlying structure of how meaning actually moves between people. Let's quickly trace the academic evolution of communication models because it's actually pretty fascinating. Back in 1949, Shannon and Weaver introduced a model focusing on the source, the transmitter, and this new concept of noise. Now, this was heavily influenced by telephone engineering, so it was a bit mechanical. It treated communication mostly like sending a raw radio signal from a tower. But then, in 1954, Wilbur Schramm added a huge breakthrough. He emphasized feedback and shared experiences, basically saying, hey, communication is interactive, it's a dialogue, not just a one-way broadcast. Fast forward to 1960, and David Berlow developed the source, message, channel, receiver model. This was a total game changer because it showed us that personal, social, and cultural factors deeply influence both the person sending the message and the person receiving it. So, in just over a decade, we evolved from a simple, linear, almost robotic view of transmission to realizing it's a fully interactive, incredibly complex human process. All of that history perfectly sets up this defining moment from Rogers and Kincaid in 1981. They describe communication as a process to reach mutual understanding. I really want to emphasize the word mutual here. It proves that communication is only truly complete when mutual understanding is reached, not just when a message is sent out into the void. Think about it. If you fire off an email and the receiver doesn't understand what you meant, communication hasn't actually happened yet. You've merely transmitted data. It's like a computer ping. The cycle is completely incomplete until both minds are perfectly aligned on the meaning. Section 2, from idea to message. Okay, so the very first critical step for the sender is encoding. This is the process of changing thoughts, feelings, or abstract ideas into external symbols, like spoken words, specific hand gestures, or visual images that someone else can eventually grasp. Let's imagine a highly trained doctor who perfectly understands the incredibly complex cellular pathology of a patient's illness. All of that brilliant medical knowledge exists purely inside the doctor's mind, in the form of, Latin terms and complex biology. To actually communicate it, the doctor must meticulously encode that technical jargon into simple, everyday metaphors and comforting, empathetic gestures so the patient isn't totally overwhelmed or terrified. Effective encoding is absolutely essential. Honestly, if you choose the wrong symbols right out of the gate, your underlying idea is completely lost before it even leaves your mouth. So, the crucial point is summarized perfectly by Joseph A. DeVito. Communication competence isn't just about having a massive vocabulary or being a super smooth talker. It actively involves adapting your message so that it is both effective and appropriate for your specific audience. A capable sender must constantly balance the content, which is the raw information they are conveying, with the relationship dimension, which is the way they are conveying it based on exactly who they are talking to. You wouldn't explain a brand new project to a room of senior executives the exact same way you would explain it to a brand new intern, right? Of course not. You are actively adapting your encoding to fit the social reality of the listener. Let's break down how this builds into the creation of a truly effective message. We have these 5 foundational characteristics: clear, complete, concise, correct, and appropriate. If your message is unclear, it gets instantly misunderstood. If it's incomplete, the receiver doesn't have the context they need to respond properly. Imagine excitedly inviting someone to a party, but completely forgetting to tell them the location or the time. That is a massive failure of completeness. And what about being correct? This doesn't just mean factual accuracy. It means your message should be free of glaring grammatical errors or confusing typos that might distract the receiver from your main point. If it's way too long, they lose interest, completely failing the concise test. As communication theorists point out, a successful message is a carefully constructed, meaningful expression. Hitting all 5 of these points ensures your encoded idea is robust enough to survive the bumpy trip to the receiver. Section 3. Channels, Receivers, and Decoding. So, the message has been packaged, and now it travels through a channel. This is simply the medium of transmission. It could be a face-to-face conversation, a written corporate report, a digital text message, or a visual flowchart. Choosing the right channel is vital, and honestly, this is where a lot of us really mess up. Have you ever tried delivering complex, emotionally sensitive news via a quick text message? Yeah, it usually doesn't end well at all. For sensitive news, a face-to-face channel is vastly superior because it's what we call a rich channel. It allows for tone of voice, eye contact, and body language. But on the flip side, if you need a permanent, verifiable record of detailed step-by-step instructions, a lean channel, like a written email or digital document, is definitely the way to go. Once the message successfully travels through that channel, it hits the receiver, who then immediately begins decoding. Decoding is the process where the active receiver assigns meaning to the symbols sent by the sender. Notice the word active there. Receiving isn't passive. You're not just a dry sponge sitting there soaking up water. The receiver's brain is acting as a high-powered, real-time translation engine. According to Berlow's theory, the receiver actively filters your message through their own personal communication skills, their current mood and attitudes, and their deep-seated cultural background. This is exactly why 2 entirely different people can hear the exact same sentence and decode it in entirely different, sometimes completely conflicting ways. And this brilliantly illustrates that exact point. Let's look at a classic classroom disconnect to see this in action. Imagine a teacher, our sender, saying to a class, "Revise the chapter carefully." The sender's intent, which is heavily encoded with their rigorous academic background, might be for the students to rigorously review their notes, outline all the key concepts, and practice sample test questions. But look at the receiver's interpretation. A busy, exhausted student might casually decode the phrase, "revise carefully," as simply skimming the chapter text once over while lying in bed half asleep. The spoken symbols were heard perfectly through the channel, no problem there. But the internal decoding was drastically different from the original encoding due to totally different expectations, definitions, and life experiences. Section 4. Feedback, completing the cycle. So how do we fix that massive disconnect? By utilizing the magical element that transforms a one-way broadcast into a functional loop. We have 3 steps here. Step 1, the receiver decodes the message. Step 2, the receiver formulates a response based entirely on their own understanding. Step 3, the receiver formally becomes the sender, firing a brand new message back. Now, stepping into this third role is actually pretty cognitively demanding. Formulating a response requires the original receiver to suddenly shoulder the burden of encoding, literally switching their brain from listening mode to articulating a follow-up. But this effort is absolutely necessary. This continuous exchange of roles is exactly what makes communication interactive. Feedback, whether it's a clarifying question, a subtle nod, or even a puzzled look, allows the original sender to modify or expand their next message, ensuring mutual understanding is actually being built. Section 5. Noise, barriers to understanding. Of course, in the real world, this perfect journey rarely goes exactly as planned. When we talk about noise in communication theory, we aren't just talking about a loud police siren wailing outside your office window. In this context, noise is absolutely anything that interferes with the cycle at any single stage, from encoding to transmission all the way to feedback. It's a pervasive and visible barrier that actively prevents the core message from arriving intact and being correctly decoded by the brain. It's basically the enemy of understanding. Let's break down the incredibly varied types of noise we battle literally every single day. First is physical noise. This is your loud traffic or a weak internet connection dropping the audio right in the middle of your video call. Then there's semantic noise, which happens when the words themselves are the barrier. This is like a lawyer using incredibly dense legal jargon with a client who has absolutely no legal background. The words are heard, but the meaning is entirely lost. Psychological noise is arguably the biggest hurdle of all. If a receiver is highly stressed, furious, or just distracted by personal problems, they simply won't decode the message accurately. Think of getting a one-word text from your partner saying, "fine." The psychological noise of you worrying if they're mad at you completely distorts how you interpret that single, tiny word. Then we have cultural noise, and this one is fascinating. Differing backgrounds lead to wild misinterpretations. In some Western cultures, direct eye contact is a sign of confidence and honesty, but in several Eastern and indigenous cultures, prolonged direct eye contact can be decoded as disrespectful or aggressive. The exact same nonverbal message is completely ruined by cultural noise. And finally, technological noise, the dreaded dead battery or complete network failure right in the middle of making an important point. Section 6. The cycle in real life. Let's take all this fascinating theory and drop it right into our daily sandbox. Think about a standard classroom context. The teacher is the sender, relying on a face-to-face channel to reach the students. The magic here is the immediate dynamic feedback. When a teacher looks out and sees a whole sea of confused faces, that nonverbal feedback allows them to instantly pivot, re-encode their idea, and try a completely different analogy on the fly. Contrast that with the workplace context. A manager uses an email channel to instruct an employee. The feedback loop here is much, much slower. The manager doesn't get to see a confused face. They have to wait for a written reply confirming the deadline. But in both scenarios, despite the totally different speeds, a continuous cycle of clear instruction and accurate feedback is the only way to guarantee that education and productivity don't just grind to a halt. Okay, here is a family communication example I think we can all deeply relate to, especially if you have teenagers at home. What does clean your room soon actually mean? This is a textbook example of semantic noise masking as everyday conversation. The parent, our sender, encodes the word soon with the emotional intent of immediately, right now, before dinner is served. But the teenager, the receiver, decodes soon as sometime later tonight, right before I go to bed, maybe, if I remember. The message was transmitted flawlessly, but without precise encoding on the front end and clear clarifying feedback on the back end, the cycle completely breaks down. And as we all know, that usually results in an incredibly frustrating argument about chores. And this breakdown happens even more frequently with our modern tools. Look at these digital communication limitations. Digital text expands our reach to the other side of the planet instantly, which is amazing, but it violently strips away crucial nonverbal feedback. We lose vocal tone, facial expressions, and body language, which actually make up a huge percentage of how we convey meaning to one another. Add in bizarre autocorrect errors, confusing punctuation, like ending a casual sentence with an aggressive period. You know exactly what I mean, that tiny dot that suddenly makes a text feel furious. And delayed responses. Because of all this, it becomes dangerously easy for a short, perfectly harmless text reply to seem intentionally rude, cold, or passive-aggressive. The digital channel itself introduces a massive amount of psychological noise into our daily cycle. Now, what's really interesting about this is the powerful reminder we get from Dennis McQuail. He reminds us that digital communication media perform massive global social functions, from daily entertainment to literally mobilizing entire populations for social movements. Because digital media is so infinitely powerful and incredibly fast, it scales our miscommunications just as quickly as our successes. This demands an even higher responsibility from all of us. We have to be absolutely meticulous about clarity when we encode our quick text messages and our corporate emails. And conversely, we must be incredibly careful, patient, and generous when we interpret and decode the digital messages of others. It goes both ways. And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway from today's deep dive. Communication is a shared responsibility. It is never just the sender's job to speak clearly, and it is never just the receiver's job to listen closely. It is a constant, intricate dance. Successful communication requires the sender to be deeply audience-centered and organized in their thoughts. At the exact same time, the receiver must be attentive, open-minded, and incredibly responsive with their feedback. You both have to shoulder the burden of making the cycle work. If one person stops trying, the whole cycle falls apart. I'll leave you with this provocative question to chew on. Where is your communication breaking down, and how will you fix the cycle? Think about a recent argument in your workplace, a confusing moment in your classroom, or tension in your own home. Are you truly sending clear, audience-appropriate messages? Are you providing constructive, honest feedback when you listen? Keep this powerful cycle in mind the next time you feel misunderstood. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you found this explainer valuable, please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel so we can keep bringing you these deep dives. See you in the next one.